Andrew, what's the Government Technical Advisory Centre?
It's the place where we answer these questions, and so
You're in a good place.
So if I'd like to go back to what Alex was really saying, because he used a lot of big words, externalities and capabilities, investment and managing unforeseen risks and so on. I'm not sure that Miriam's colleagues on the Commission understand. I'm definitely sure my daughter Judy, who's at the back, also doesn't understand what we're really talking about here. So what is the big debate here? What is the big issue? And Alex is really talking about a huge debate in economics in the world today. And it's a debate that has been around for a long time. It has been given prominence by the publication of this immense body of evidence that inequality has risen in so many countries, in the US, in the UK, and we also know that inequality is increased in South Africa in the last 20 years. And so that's promoted a debate about the links between growth and redistribution. In 1956, Arthur Oken, is one of the great giants of American economics, published a book called Equity and Efficiency, The Big Trade-Off. And that suggests the idea that if you're an economy with scarce resources and you've got to choose what you do, you can choose. You can invest in growth, you can invest in redistribution or in equity, but there's a trade-off between them. And we now know that that's not the case. It's not the case for lots of reasons, and the truth is that Arthur Oken's book actually illustrates many of those reasons himself. He emphasizes in that book the importance of investment in people, the investment in education systems, in housing, and so on, as things that governments can do, things that societies can prioritize that are good for growth and good for equality, good for improving opportunities and broadening participation in the economy. But we now know more than that. We also now know that economies that are very unequal grow more slowly than economies that are more equal. And so we know that one of the reasons the South African economy is growing slowly and has done in comparative terms over the last 2 decades or so, one of the reasons is because it's held back by some of the ways in which inequality imposes barriers to growth. Now, what those barriers are is quite complicated. Some of them are about social cohesion. Some of them are about the difficulties of achieving consensus about policy in a society that is very fragmented and unequal. Some of them are about education and capabilities. They're about people growing up in rural areas in very limited conditions, without access to electricity and housing circumstances that are difficult, in which it's difficult to create opportunities and make small businesses work. It's certainly about the impact of inequality on education and capabilities investment itself. But that bit of knowledge that internationally, countries that are very unequal grow more slowly than countries that are more equal, is a very dismal piece of information for us who live in one of the most unequal societies in the world. Are we doomed to grow more slowly? So that's the thought experiment. Think for a moment about what we might do to redistribute income more aggressively in South Africa. Would that be good for growth or bad for growth? Well, I mean, the answer must depend on what you're doing. Some of the things that you could do might be damaging, some of the things might be good for growth. There has been a very interesting recent study that has looked at the international evidence. It said, well, what is the impact on growth of the redistributive activities of government? And it's a hugely interesting finding. The answer is that redistribution itself doesn't do very much. But redistribution, because it leads to a more equal society, contributes positively to growth. Not in everything that can be done, and not to any limit. So if you read this, if you don't, you give some numbers to you, OECD countries, that's the sort of rich countries of the world, the rich club of the world, have inequality, which in the terms that we measure it, the Gini coefficient, are about 40 or 0.45 or 0.4. South Africa has a Gini coefficient, very high inequality of somewhere close to 0.7. OECD countries redistribute mainly through their social security systems. Alex is a professor of social security, so that's what he's interested in. Mainly through their social security systems, to the extent of 12, 13, 14 Gini points. They bring their inequality down from 0.4 or 0.45 to about 0.3. That's a lot of redistribution. South Africa's up there, 0.7. So that suggests that quite a lot of redistribution can be done without interfering negatively with growth. I can see you looking at me with a clock in your mind, so I'm going to have to make my key point in a moment. And so that says there are sensible things to do that redistribute income that are good for growth. So there I am completely on Alex's side here. There are many things that can be done that are redistributive, that are good for growth. But is social security really the most important of those? That's the challenge that South Africa faces here. The problem with arguing that you do the redistribution through social security is that social security systems don't do all that much redistributing from the rich to the poor. We do that through social assistance systems. Our grant system taxes the economy and spends it in a non-contributory way on people who are over the age of 60 or people with children and have low incomes. The subject to means it's a redistributive system. Social security systems take contributions from you while you work and they give them back to you when you're old or disabled or suffer some catastrophic event. You have some big medical emergency, so a social insurance system in the health system lets you pool risks, share contributions, and it goes back to you if you suffer catastrophic events or when you get old or disabled. So it turns out that big redistribution in OECD countries that I talked about a little while ago is really very largely about lifetime redistribution, if you like, within the middle classes. Some of it is redistribution from the rich to the poor, but not a great deal of it, and that's Piketty's great finding. And here's the great dilemma, I'll finish with this, for social security systems. Social security systems do redistribute. They do also do good things for labor markets. They take the risks away from the job, so you don't have to be so hung up about losing your job. There's still unemployment insurance and social security to fall back on. Social security systems are good for the labor market because they share the risks through a statutory system and can allow people to take risks, to invest in businesses, to take a chance on a job that might last but might create opportunities. And so that risk sharing is good. But they do inhibit, they do have the unintended consequence of, to some extent, weakening the incentive for households to accumulate. In other words, social security systems can substitute for household accumulation. And Piketty finds that the comfortable OECD, so big social security welfare state societies have actually done very badly over the last century in redistributing wealth, in creating incentives that allow poor households to move up through investing in their own businesses, in their own homes.
So no upward mobility there.
So there are trade-offs here, and my inclination is to say that the NDP gets it right in one important respect, in that it emphasizes how we need to do things that create accumulation opportunities for households, job opportunities for people that contribute to their primary incomes and broad-based growth. I would think that is inclusive growth, not just through the social security system. Yes, there are social security reforms we need, but there are other kinds of redistribution that are also important.
And that's where my bell is going to have to ring. Iraj, we've seen you through the years as a commentator on policy development and economic growth. Do you agree that the last 20 years have not been sufficient?
I think in terms of what we started off with, that's the best we could do in terms of rescuing an economy that back in 1994 was close to total disaster. It was stressed. So from that point of view, some first things first had to be done. And one thing that we cannot compromise is at any point during this debate, think or assume that growth is dispensable. Growth is like oxygen to human body. You can have all ideologies, be leftist, statist, communist, capitalist, whatever your choice. But whatever you do, don't strangle growth. Because if you do, your ism is bound to fail. So what does that mean? It means all this example and comparisons that we do with OECD, with any country of our choice, let's just get the base right. if you look at the helicopter view of an economy, any economy of your choice, there are two mechanisms for distribution. One is the primary distribution that happens through the capabilities of individuals, be it in a capitalist system, communist system, it's the same. Individuals, through their capabilities, lead to a pattern of distribution, which may or may not be acceptable. Then the secondary intervention comes in, which says we don't like it, we are communist, capitalist, we want to fiddle with it, humanist, and we all agree that there is room for that secondary distribution. But let's be absolutely clear that secondary distribution is sustainable only if its proportion to the primary distribution is right. In other words, if you have 10 people working and 99 people or 99,000 people want to fix the system, it's not workable. When we have now a system that 17 million people on a monthly basis rely on 5.6 million or 6 million people to sort of help them out, this system is not sustainable. It's necessary for our conditions. It's our desperate last resort to keep our society together from the terrible place that we started. But let's not fool ourselves. We cannot, should not accept this as an acceptable way that South Africa should be. And that's NDP wants to do that. That's the vision of where we want to go. So where do we want to go? We want to ask ourselves where things have gone wrong that the primary distribution hasn't got itself going. Why is it that our youth are not able to participate in the economy and take care of themselves? And the answer there immediately is we have failed, and you must accept our education system has failed our youth. We have poured resources to it. Remember, it's not a question of money. It's not as if money wasn't available, but the system of education, the curriculum, the contestation, the over-politicization, over-racialization of it led to a situation where today our graduates cannot stand on their own. So the primary distribution mechanism has become faulty, dysfunctional, problematic. What's the second portal or mechanism of redistribution? This part of it, the secondary one, is done through the mechanism of the state. It's municipalities, it's provinces, it's government departments, right? And we know, and government and our presidents, all of them have acknowledged that the machinery of the state is not up to the task. It's not that there wasn't enough resources to build houses. Money was rolled over. It's not as if money is not there, textbooks are not delivered. It's not that textbooks are not delivered. When the textbooks are delivered, the teachers don't teach. And when they want to teach, they are incapable of teaching the right thing. So we are redistributing in the name of the social security, pouring resources into incompetent teachers who building our next generation to remain dependent upon some handout of some kind. We need to talk about these things. We cannot just have a chatty discourse and go home and hope that tomorrow things will be sorted out. Yeah. We need to bring the unions into here. We need to bring incompetent government managers into the task and say, you are subverting the revolution. You are stopping you are stopping the primary mechanisms that we want to expand. Because ideally in 20 years' time, we want to, much like the OECD or any country of your choice, 90% of the capabilities be in the primary sector or the primary round, the 10% of it will be a modification. And there we will tax the rich to the kilt. We'll make sure that things are delivered. But how are we going to do it if we put the resources to the municipalities and yet the sewage system is not fixed up? And it's not rocket scientists. It's not as if we have to reinvent how to fix the water reticulation system. It's not. We're living in Johannesburg today, each one of us, every day behind a broken traffic light. Do we not?
But we recently had the first presidential local government summit. Do you think that will go any far towards solving these problems?
President Mbeki used to have imbeciles. Joel was part of it. We are not short of talk shops. We are short of keeping people accountable. The day that a president looks to a minister and say, you have failed the nation, out. No discussion. The day that a president goes to a municipality
That's why we have monitoring and evaluation.
But I don't want a report from that unit. I want rewarding those who have achieved and sack those who are subverting the poverty alleviation. That's what we need to see. The day that a president, a minister comes to a region and say, you guys are messing it up, out.
Trevor, you...
Shape up or ship out. Those are the elements.
You call yourself an activist, but you're lucky in terms of this debate that you have one foot in academia because you're studying social protection, and the other foot, as you say, an activist on the ground with the very people who social protection is supposed to, social security is supposed to protect. What are your thoughts on the professor's presentation?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I can't let Iraj get away with what he's just been saying and getting all the applause. Because it's really dishonest of him in the sense that he started off by saying that, I think you asked him what happened with gear. And he said, no, gear has worked well. And then he says, the major yardstick for an economy is growth. But has gear helped our economy to grow? I don't think so. Now, we're talking about inclusive growth. Did gear include the poor and the working class in discussions and debates about the type of growth we need? No. Gear replaced the RDP, the Reconstruction and Development Program, whose motto even a kid in the township knew: people-driven, people-centered development. Iraj and his team pushed gear aside and said, no, we will decide from the top. Now, we are discussing the NDP, but at the moment, we haven't really implemented the NDP. We're still using the gear template. Where has gear taken us? We are #1 in inequality. This is what you are telling us. This is what Thomas Piketty is telling us. We're #1 in HIV infections. We're #1 in rape and domestic violence. We're #1 in corporate theft and corruption. We're #1 in so many bad things that there is no way that gear was a success. So I think we should just, get rid of that kind of populism. Now, secondly, we are talking about social protection. Okay? Thomas Piketty, I'm happy when people talk about Thomas Piketty because he shows that the rise in inequality doesn't only happen in South Africa. It's happening throughout the world. And you know how, South African elite like to say we must be like the international community, okay? Yeah, but we cannot follow a world which is busy making the rich richer and the poor poorer. And why is that happening? Well, okay, Alex, I agree with the thrust of your paper, but you use euphemisms. I think you even complained. The modern economy, well, is the capitalist economy. Capitalism is facing a global crisis. It's a rolling crisis. It goes from Spain to the UK. It's everywhere. During periods of upswing, there's a crisis. Downswing, there's a crisis. Stagnation, there's a crisis. It moved from one, it's just like that. So what we're finding is that the international bourgeoisie, the bosses, the statespeople on top, they don't have a solution. The only thing they're debating is how to manage the crisis. So they differ. In South Africa, I think that's the problem. The SACP, Blade Nzimande, saying one thing. I don't know what's your unit saying another thing. That's the thing, But they are all agreed on one thing, the elite, that they must shift the burden on to the poor, on to the working class. Hence, you have retrenchments. In Europe, you have the dismantling of the welfare state. In New Zealand, they want to raise retirement age from 60 to 70. You must work until you're dead, okay? This is happening. So what I'm trying to say is that we're busy talking about social protection, but the world is moving the opposite direction, removing the protections which working class people are currently enjoying. This means to me that South Africa has to stand up. It can't just follow the world over the precipice, over the cliff. We have to stand up. We have to realize that we need courage, vision to stand up and go against the grain. So that is the thrust of what I want to say. I could add more, but maybe...
You've still got a minute or two.
Okay. For example, one thing, I think someone said this, you know, when Margaret Thatcher came with the ideas of the World Bank, the IMF, neoliberalism, hey, you British, we have to tighten your belts. We have to trim that fat, okay? In Africa, hey, we have no fat to trim. We've got bones to rattle. That's all we have. You know, we don't have that choice. And then, you know, economists, I don't know, I think Iraj, I've heard him argue this, and I think Alex says, they say, no, South African workers are overpaid. You know, our labor market is inflexible. But on page 7 of his paper, it's clear we have removed most protection for our workers. The cleaners who clean this university, I'm telling you, they get 2,600 rand a month. Who is the vice chancellor? It's like that. Well, at UJ, they get 2,600. Domestic workers, they get 1,800 a month. You know, this is not a wage. It's a dying wage. It's an insult to the working class. And then, so I think that as South Africans, and just to take you up on NUMSA, I just come from, I'm a bit tired, from a march by NUMSA, where in Niger, what is happening is that, you know, the big brouhaha about, you know, investing in infrastructure. We're going to build, you know, railway carriages. Well, who is going to build our rail carriages? Some companies in China, you know, with some BE, with ANC links. Jobs are going to be lost in Niger. So this is the problem. So from that point of view, I think NUMSA is doing a good thing. It's fighting for an industrial policy which prioritizes the working class, which prioritizes the Southern Africa, which prioritizes Africa and doesn't only, you know, just follow, you know, what the Chinese communist bourgeoisie dictate through their bribery.
I suppose that, thank you, Mr. Trevor Ngwane. Let's give them a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen.